Hello, 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 and welcome to this edition of A Quick Pint. Now, before I start, let me let you into a guilty little secret. In about 1997, I think it might have been autumn 97, though perhaps it was a bit later, a song came out called Barbie Girl by the Danish-Norwegian band Aqua, and I rather liked it. It got into my head. And there's no internet in those days, so I had no choice but to go to Woolworths and buy the single Barbie Girl on tape. And I recall that it cost about 99p. Now, thinking about it, it actually got evolutionary psychology pretty much correct. What it was representing in the song and also in the related video was really the patriarchal system to which we are historically evolved. You have Barbie, you have Ken. Ken is muscular, he is physically stronger than Barbie, he displays wealth and power and status, he has a nice car, things like this. He likes going to party. Come on, Barbie, let's go party. And she's quite open about the fact that she's a blonde bimbo girl in a fantasy world that is interested in parties and so on. Basically, she is sexually selected for a man who is physically bigger and stronger than her, who can look after her, who has high socioeconomic status, which means that he can look after her and provide for her, and who is really kind of benevolently sexist. She has selected in a patriarchal way. What he would presumably ask for in return, though this is only implicit in the video, in the video and in the song, is that he can control her sexuality, can control her to some extent, so that he can ensure that he is not cuckolded, i.e. he is in charge. And she implies this in her words, I'm a blonde bimbo girl in a fantasy world. She doesn't really think too much. She just accepts the system. She accepts the system to which she has evolved over many thousands of years. So this kind of makes sense. Now, I have just watched Barbie the movie, because a number of you lovely boys have been suggesting I should do so, and in evolutionary terms, this is completely illiterate, and therefore makes absolutely no sense, and I thought I would basically dissect what I saw, which was, I mean, shockingly bad and contradictory. So we begin in Barbie Land, but it's not the Barbie Land that's represented in the song by Aqua. It's the new Barbie Land, where Barbie is not just a blonde bimbo girl. No, that is stereotypical Barbie. That's traditional Barbie. There's all the new Barbies that have been created to try and promote the idea that women can be anything. There's all the feminist Barbies that have come along in recent decades. And now this, Barbie the Nobel Prize winner, Barbie the scientist, Barbie the doctor, Barbie the anything she can possibly want to be. So you basically have feminism world in which absolutely everything of any social significance whatsoever is female and is run by one or other kind of Barbie. Even the faces on Mount Rushmore are Barbies. The president of this world is a black female Barbie, and on it goes. Anybody of any social importance is a Barbie, but yet is a woman, therefore. But yet there are men. There are Kens, and all of the men are Kens. Now, why is this? Why are there these Kens at all, and who are these Kens? Well, these Kens are muscular, which implies that actually on some level, in an evolutionary sense, the women are sexually selecting for men who are muscular. They're creating sexual dimorphism by selecting for men that are muscular. And they work as lifeguards. So the one thing then, the one fear in this world of immortality, in this world in which nobody dies, in this world in which nobody obviously seems to have children or anything like that, the one, well, some of them do perhaps, but the one thing that they seem to fear is the sea and drowning in the sea. So what this, of course, implies in that women are in charge in evolutionary terms is really a kind of extreme R strategy in which men and women are relatively similar, in fact, to the extent that women have taken over. So there is some evidence for this, that females that are very high in feminist identification tend to be physically and mentally masculinized, and therefore they are not that different from men. And therefore they are, if you think about an extremely unstable and dangerous ecology, patriarchy does not really develop to any great extent. What happens is that the man simply, what he is evolved to do is essentially pump and dump. What he is evolved to do is find females who are young, implying that they're fertile, and who are good looking, implying that they're fertile, and also just implying good genes, and to fertilize as many of those whom he can possibly get away with. That is what he is evolved to do, and he will, and he has no point in him investing in his wife or his offspring, because in an unstable ecology they could just be killed off at any minute. So there's no point doing that. So that's not what he does. The females in this ecology, obviously, they have something to lose from the sexual encounter, and so it makes sense for them to select for slightly different things. To select for status, because a man who has higher status will be able to invest in them, or willing to invest in them and their offspring is more likely to survive. And to select for muscle and size and so forth, because if you do that, then the man can look after you. Now, in an extremely unstable, and what the man will therefore ask for in return, if you say to him, okay, well, I want this investment in return for sex, is he will say, well, then I want to be sure that the offspring are mine, and therefore I must be able to control your sexuality, and therefore patriarchy starts to develop, and then you end up with the development of this entire patriarchal system, which is also good at the level of group selection, because it means that if men can be sure they're not being cuckolded, there's less intergroup conflict between the men, and the men are able to unite against outsider forces and stop the group from being destroyed by a rival group. So what you have in a highly unstable ecology is basically women that are adapted to this kind of system, i.e. not patriarchy, the opposite of that, to just this individualistic system where they're not to be invested in, and therefore the women end up being really quite physically and mentally similar to men. And there is evidence for that if you look at ecologies like that, the mental and physical differences between men and women are not very large. So therefore women, to a greater extent, have power, engage in hunting, and do what might be considered to be traditionally manly things. But even here, even in the most extreme our strategy ecologies, there is a degree to which, live fast, die young ecologies, there is a degree to which women still need men, because there are certain physical tasks that they can't do because they're simply too weak to do them, physically weak to do them. And this is what you see here. You see some evidence then of the beginnings of patriarchy, in the sense that what these women are saying to the men is, I need you to do certain things for me. I need men that are muscular, I need men that are tall, I need men that can rescue me if I start drowning in the sea or whatever. And ultimately, I mean, the implication is that there should be some other rival Barbie land that these men can fight against. I mean, why else are these women, have they sexually selected over time for muscular, physically muscular men who are good at things like being lifeguards? The only implication to it is there's some sort of sexual dynamic there, but ultimately it's the feminist idea. Women are in charge, men are dangerous. One could even argue that men are there possibly to sexually assault you, men, and therefore the women must gather together in female groups, in the harem, if you like, in female operated groups, to stop that from happening. Men are dangerous, men must be kept out, men do not even spend the night at the women's houses, they live alone, and their purpose is, well, implicitly to provide sex for the women and also to look after them. So there is some patriarchal dimension already there, in so much as the men can say, fine, if I look after you, then I want something in return. Now, for some reason, they don't seem to ask for much in return in this. So you can see how, even at the beginning, it's evolutionarily illiterate. Now, in this society, interestingly, all of the women seem to be equal. They are all equal in all having high status. There is no, so you have women who are Muslim, you have women who are fat, you have women who are all different kinds of races, and there is this idea of complete equality. Now, this is implicitly a correct understanding of evolution. If you look at the book Warriors and Warriors by J.F. Benenson, she shows that this is very important to females. Females are evolved over a very long period of time to basically live in a harem, because as we saw earlier, women will sexually select for status. They will want to have the higher status men. It is much better to be a co-wife of a very high status man than to be the one wife of a low status man. So you end up with polygamy, and in that context then the man will invest more of his resources in the newest, most nubile, youngest wife. The further wives will be cast off a bit, and so what they will tend to do is they will tend to get together these other co-wives and allo-parent each other's children. They will trust each other to do this by creating extremely strong social bonds, by sharing intimate information and having very strong one-on-one friendships. And because you can only have a very small number of very strong one-on-one friendships, they will tend to create these cliques in which they have to be able to trust each other because they're dealing with each other's children. And so therefore it is a clique of complete equality. There has to be this feeling of complete equality and of everyone feeling validated and so forth. And any woman who is the queen bee or who is different in any way can be expected to be shunned by these kinds of female cliques. And indeed, I think if you talk to a lot of school teachers, they will agree that bullying is much worse at girls' schools. And it will be based around the girl not quite fitting into the clique, being a bit different, being a bit more masculinized and I don't know, harsh in her thinking or whatever, upsetting people, whatever it happens to be. And she will be excluded. And Benenson looks at this in her very very interesting book. Now they do get that right, because then there is this concept of the weird Barbie, the Barbie who's a bit strange, who basically is excluded from the community and is treated like a witch. But it has kind of gnosis, has kind of knowledge of the true nature of things, which they all find upsetting and which precludes them from fully living in their little fantasy world. And this weird Barbie thinks about death and thinks about weird thinks about and has gone a bit strange with her appearance and is no longer fully beautiful. Even though, interestingly, in order to promote certain modern woke ideas, among these supposedly extremely beautiful Barbies, you have a Barbie that's really, really obese, and nobody comments on the lack of beauty there. So they're just promoting this idea of fat acceptance, and that's just a minor little bit of brainwashing within the film. But anyway, this weird Barbie talks about getting cellulite, and she cuts her hair strange, and she wears odd makeup, and she wears peculiar clothes and whatever. Now the plot transpires that what the main Barbie, the eye of the story, as it were, who is the stereotypical Barbie, she starts thinking about death and such like, and therefore she is advised to go and see Weird Barbie, to go and see, as it were, the wise woman. And she is told she has to enter the real world and find the person who is playing with her, because it's probably the person who is playing with her who is thinking about death and negative things, and that's making her feel negative, and therefore stop this from happening, because if it doesn't, then she will turn into Weird Barbie herself. So she enters the real world. Now this is again very interesting because it's not the real world. So she enters the real world. The real world is a world in which apparently there's all this sexism, and this is the world of the patriarchy, and men are in charge, and men are in charge of everything, and she can't understand this because, of course, in Barbie world, women are in charge of everything, and men are just there as sort of de facto security guards of the community, really. In real world, that's not the case. Mattel, for example, the makers of Barbie, is entirely run by men, albeit men of different races. Men are constantly doing and saying sexist things. It is an incredibly sexist, patriarchal, traditional world. Now, obviously, this is a nonsense. This is not the world of now. For a start, this movie, Barbie, has been made very substantially by women. It has been written by women. It is those that are, the directors that are made by women. So this is only going to show you that we do not live in this highly patriarchal world. Women are in senior positions in Mattel and in many other corporations. So it's palpable nonsense to suggest that in the real world women do not have positions of power or whatever, and that we're in this extreme patriarchy. Until quite recently, the Prime Minister in the UK was a woman. The Prime Minister before that was a woman. And the Prime Minister of Finland until recently was a woman. We are clearly not in the world that they are representing. So it's very, very interesting. It's a kind of very manipulative propaganda. It's a bit like under communism, the way that they would try and make out that the Tsar and his agents are still there with power behind the scenes running things, and we have to be very, very careful, or the Tsar will return. Of course, that wasn't the reality at all. The communists were completely in charge of the Soviet Union by the 1930s. They were just totally in charge. There were no agents of the Tsar left. They had taken complete power. I don't say there's no patriarchal influence still, but the idea that we live in now, this patriarchal society in which men are in charge of everything, and that's what is portrayed in Barbie the movie, is complete nonsense. So you have this ludicrous outdated, anachronistic representation of reality that is probably more in line with the reality of 100 years ago, when women were still fighting for the vote in many countries, than the reality now. Anyway, she goes, by the way, interestingly, it's a world of complete racial equality. This is another incongruity, because those two things aren't separate. Racial equality and sexual equality aren't separate. If you read Pasha Glove's book, The Fate of Empires, he shows that at a certain stage in civilization, the religion, which tends to uphold group-oriented values as the will of God, starts to be questioned and starts to collapse. What does it uphold? Well, it upholds things like positive and negative ethnocentrism as the will of God, and therefore basically racism, to a certain extent, the exclusion of those from different groups as the will of God. It also upholds the patriarchy, because, as I said, the patriarchy helps to promote ethnocentrism and the survival of the group by reducing intermale conflict, and meaning that men are more possibly ethnocentric and can work together. So all of these things go together. So the idea that you can have an extremely sexist patriarchal world, but also one in which all of the races are apparently united and there's just no racism and it doesn't exist and it's not even an issue, it's just not an issue at all, is palpably nonsense. But they have portrayed it like that, I don't know, to make it easier or to make it less complicated, or just to indoctrinate the audience with the idea that this is reality actually, and that we live in a sort of multiracial harmony, but not so much in relation to sex in this instance. So they just turn down the George Floyd kind of Black Lives Matter idea and imply that it's a world of racial harmony and so forth and no problems, and ramp up the sexism idea for the purposes of this movie, which I thought was an extremely lazy and inaccurate thing to do. So we go there, this world of sexual equality, as I say, it's nonsense, obviously. There's women CEOs, women have helped to make the film, and so on. And we discover that actually the person that is playing with Barbie is a middle-aged Hispanic woman. This Hispanic woman has a Daria kind of daughter who meets Barbie and complains that, oh, Barbie promotes sexism. You know, again, a completely anachronistic understanding of Barbie, since Barbie has gone woke. I mean, that might have, Barbie promotes benevolent sexism. Barbie tries to dissuade women from attaining positions of power and so forth because she's stereotypical Barbie. Now, this is obviously nonsense, because she is only stereotypical Barbie rather than all these other Barbies that have emerged since. And as this happens, the Kens follow the Barbies into the real world, discover patriarchy in a very comical kind of form. And I should say there are comical elements to this film. There are things that are interesting, that are funny. Patriarchy, it's to do with horses and cowboys and things like this. And they go back to Barbie Land in the absence of stereotypical Barbie and a number of others, and they start imposing patriarchy on Barbie Land, and to come to the conclusion that they're going to engage in a vote to change the laws of Barbie Land such that it's highly patriarchal. Now, this is quite interesting, and when the Barbies return to try and stop this and try and stop the Kens from imposing patriarchy on Barbie Land, they see that so many of the Barbies love it. So many of them are happy. They really enjoy this. They think it's great. And you've got it's almost like, it reminds me of Bill and Ted's Most Excellent Adventure and Bill and Ted's Most Bogus Journey. I wondered if there were deliberate allusions to this. The relationship between Bill and Ted and the medieval babes, the medieval princesses that they pick up on their time travels, and the whole relationship is utterly one of benevolent sexism and 1980s benevolent sexism and Baywatch and all that kind of thing. And it was and that kind of music, heavy metal and so forth. And it's as though they were kind of alluding to this, the kind of 80s stereotype sort of love movie or whatever, and the Barbies are saying that the other Barbies, they've got no resistance. They haven't been educated. They haven't been educated to be resistant to the patriarchy. So therefore, they're being very, very easily swayed by it. Now, this is, of course, there's no reason to think this at all, is there? What's much more likely is that their instincts, they are adapted, they are evolved, they are selected over a very long time to find the patriarchy normal, and to find the patriarchy good, and to find the patriarchy what they want. And I'm sorry, this is no longer a quick pint. I'm noticing this is getting quite long, but there's enough to go into here. And so that's what they do. They say, well, they haven't got any resistance. They haven't been told about the patriarchy. If everything's assumed to be environmentally determinist, if only they had been told about the problem of the patriarchy, then they would have psychological mechanisms to resist it. No, that's clearly not what's going on at all. What's happened is that they are evolved to the patriarchy, they are evolved to enjoy it, they are evolved to want it, and they are being confronted with their evolutionary match, and they like it, and so they can be very, very easily drawn into it. And that's what the Barbies that have not been indoctrinated because they've been away in Earthland are aware of, and what they want to do something about. Now, then you have a number of other interesting points. So there's one point in which I thought was particularly interesting. The Hispanic woman sort of has this moment of being highly articulate and self-aware, in which she talks about the problems of being a modern woman. We have to be beautiful and pretty and so forth, but we can't go on about it, and we also have to have a career, and we're expected to be mums and whatever, as well as have a job. It's really, really difficult. We have to pretend to be ambitious and so forth in a kind of a man's world, but we can't go on about it and seem like we're ambitious. We have to be able to do this and that, and all of these contradictions that modern women have to live with, i.e. that they have to basically be men, they have to work, they have to have a career, they have to ascend the career ladder, they have all those pressures, but they also have to be women, they have to be beautiful, they have to be pretty, they have to be mothers, they have to look after kids and whatever, and how difficult this is for them to be able to balance these sets of social obligations, and what hard work it is, and how they're pulled in different directions. And this is blamed on the patriarchy, which is of course complete nonsense. It's feminism that has created that. If there was no feminism, then these women would be like the Amish, who I met in Pennsylvania when I was there a couple of weeks ago. And the Amish, including the Amish women, have sky-high levels of subjective happiness. Why? Because they are living in an evolutionary match. They are living in the context to which they are evolved, and that is patriarchy. And they have a clear social role, and that is to be mothers, and to be the runners of households, and to be wives, and to do the sexual division of labour. And they are extremely happy. And if you take women, not all women, but most women who are basically evolved to this patriarchy, and place them in the evolutionary mismatch of a modern feminist society, then you are putting all these pressures on them. You are making them compete with men. You are making them do things which are basically, unnatural to them, really. And the result, of course, is that they have all these contradictions and these pressures, and they feel extremely unhappy. But fascinating that this is blamed on the patriarchy itself, not doing enough to help them, not on the fact that it's the patriarchy that was there to look after them, to defer to women, to hold doors open to women, to be benevolently sexist to women, to have deference to women, to stand up when women enter the room, to give women a sense of importance, but in a different way from men, while women do different roles because they are physically, on average physically, and to some extent mentally different, and with different evolved roles and capacities. So it was very interesting, but that's not discussed. And there's another bit which is interesting, where they're talking about different kinds of Barbie, and the Hispanic woman says that she would like it. Can't they just be like ordinary Barbie, ordinary mum, housewife sort of Barbie? Can't they just be that? And again, another interesting moment of clarity, which just sort of flows by unremarked upon. She's asking to be a housewife and a mother, and to just be able to be content and happy and accepted and validated being that. Well, of course she won't be. She'll be told by the feminists that you've wasted your life, and that you're a failure, and that you're no good, and whatever, and there'll be this pressure on you to try and compete. So I thought that was very interesting as well. Now finally, the way that it ends is that the Kens are going to take over and change Barbie Land to being a patriarchy, and where, I don't know, women can't vote or whatever. And so the women decide to divide the Kens, to divide and rule. So the Kens fight each other, and then the women take over and keep it the same as it is, and say, oh well, one day gradually we'll develop into a sexually equal society where maybe even a Ken could be a high court judge. Not quite yet. But be a lower court judge at the moment. But maybe one day. Again, this is completely incongruous with the study of male and female dynamics in terms of evolution. And Joyce Benenson, woman anthropologist, looks at this. Women are generally not very good at forming coalitions. They have a small number. They are evolved to form a small number of very close one-on-one friendships, and they see any outsiders to their clique as an enemy, who might steal their friend. That they've worked very, very hard on. I've never heard a man talk about the idea of stealing someone's friend, but women talk about this. Because it's a clique, it's a very close clique, it's one-on-one. So women tend, therefore, not to build large coalitions. They build small coalitions, very intense, small coalitions, because that's what they're evolved to do in the harem, to allo-parent each other's children. What men are evolved to do is build large coalitions, to build armies, because it's the men that defend the entire group against the other army, who will otherwise come in, kill all the men, and take the women. That's our evolutionary past, and it's not that long ago. So that's what we're evolved to do, that's what men are evolved to do, and that's what they do. So you'd be much more able to divide and rule women because of the propensity towards cliques than you would be to divide and rule men, who are extremely good at building very large coalitions. And again, there is a moment of clarity in the film before it goes haywire, where you're seeing this. The men realise the importance, the Kens realise the importance of the patriarchy, and it crosses racial lines, it crosses all kinds of lines. They are able to build this massive coalition and take over. And of course, that's what they historically have done. And then ultimately, it culminates in this weird religious experience apropos of nothing, where this elderly woman who's had both her breasts cut off, who invented Barbie or something, tells Barbie about how great she is and how she's going to be wonderful. It's just nonsense. I mean, it was just cloying. But that is the movie, and the fundamental problem with it is it's evolutionarily illiterate and therefore doesn't make any sense and therefore is incoherent and is just frankly laughable. It's not a feminist movie, and it's not an anti-feminist movie either. It's just it's a series of rather incoherent, evolutionarily illiterate attempts at propaganda. Well, watch it if you want to, but I hope I've watched it so you don't have to. And I will see you soon, and goodbye.